By mid-1943, the Eastern Front had become a labyrinth of attrition. After the catastrophe at Stalingrad, Hitler desperately needed a victory to regain momentum. The Wehrmacht, bruised but still lethal, plotted a bold plan: encircle and annihilate Soviet forces in the bulge near Kursk. That plan would be codenamed Operation Citadel. But the Soviets had not remained idle. Over months, their intelligence, counterintelligence, spies, intercepts, and even methods of deception had pieced together German intentions. Stalin's high command prepared in ruthless detail defenses in depth, minefields, concealed anti-tank lines, decoy positions, and a silent buildup of reserves lay waiting. The Kursk salient, a protruding bulge of Soviet lines into German-held territory, became a magnet for destruction. Germans would strike from both north and south, hoping to pinch the bulge and crash into the Soviet interior. Preparations, spycraft, deception, and death lines. In the weeks before July, the air was thick with espionage and misdirection. The Soviets deployed radio deception, false troop concentrations, dummy tanks, and misinformation, aiming to draw German attention away from real force placements. German planners underestimated Soviet strength, a fatal miscalculation. They assumed the Soviets had perhaps 1,500 tanks in the salient. In reality, Soviet forces had over 5,000 in position. But deception alone would not win the day. The Soviets built a multi-tiered defensive network: frontline trenches, anti-tank ditches, barbed wire, mine belts, concealed guns, mobile reserves. They created a fortress of steel in miniature. As the night of July 4th turned into July 5th, the German assault began. The sound of artillery, engines, and human fear merged into one brutal overture. Operation Citadel, the German offensive, begins. At dawn on July 5th, 1943, thunder broke. On both flanks of the Kursk salient, German panzers and motorized troops surged forward. The offensive would span 150 miles north to south and push deep into Soviet territory. In the north, Army Group Center advanced. In the south, Army Group South. Their hope: meet in the east of Kursk and sever the Soviet forces inside. But the deeper they pushed, the more they met hidden killers: mines, anti-tank guns, concealed bunkers, and waves of Soviet fire. In many sectors, the advance ground to a halt. German tanks became mobile targets. In the southern thrust, the advance reached 30 miles into the bulge, its deepest penetration. Yet German pressure was bleeding them dry. In the northern sector, movement was more sluggish, only about 10 miles gained. German supertanks, Tigers, Panthers, Ferdinand tank destroyers, roared into the fray, showing destructive power. But numbers and coordination counted more than sheer firepower. Fuel shortages, logistic strains, and delays hampered the German air support. The Luftwaffe was forced to throttle its sorties over time, limiting its ability to influence the ground fight. The turning point: Prokhorovka and beyond. The real clash would come on July 12th at Prokhorovka. Here, some of the largest tank-on-tank engagements in history took place. Soviet armored units counterattacked the German WW2’s Panzer Corps in a desperate bid to break the hammer. Eyewitnesses recall fields ripped by fire and track ruts. Soviet Guard units surged forward, hoping mass would overwhelm German precision. It was not a clean victory on either side. Losses were massive, coordination was chaotic, but the psychological toll on the Germans was profound. Their elite armored corps, battered, frustrated, and bleeding, lost confidence in ultimate victory. After Prokhorovka, the German push faltered. Hitler, sensing danger, eventually ordered a withdrawal. The gamble had failed. Operation Citadel was called off by mid-July. The initiative shifted to the Soviets. Counteroffensives, Kutuzov and beyond. The Soviet response was immediate. Two major counteroffensives, Operation Kutuzov and Operation Rumyantsev, pushed against German positions around Orel and Kharkov respectively. Kutuzov, launched on July 12th, struck Army Group Center, reducing the Orel salient and inflicting heavy losses. It gained strategic depth and forced Germany to divert resources. Simultaneously, Soviet forces moved toward Kharkov, reclaiming ground and pressing the Germans onto the defensive in a ripple effect. By August 23rd, Kursk's political geography had been altered. From that moment, the Red Army would maintain the operational initiative. German forces on the Eastern Front would react, never again plan a major offensive of their own. Human stories in steel and fire. Amid the machines and maneuvers, there were human moments of heroism, tragedy, and sacrifice. Captain Mikhail Feofanovich Potapov, just 22, led an anti-tank artillery battery near the Ponairy railway station and destroyed 10 German tanks before falling in battle. The Soviet Air Force flew over 118,000 sorties during the battle, destroying thousands of German aircraft and establishing air supremacy. Their pilots braved anti-aircraft fire, fatigue, and the brutal heat of summer. Medics, engineers, signalers, armor crews, all fought under nerve-shredding conditions. Many died in silence, buried beneath twisted steel or caught in the blast of unexpected explosions. Aftermath and historical significance. The Battle of Kursk left behind staggering numbers. Over 2 million men, around 6,000 tanks, and 4,000 aircraft participated. German losses in men, tanks, and morale were severe. After Kursk, the Wehrmacht was no longer capable of launching large-scale strategic offensives on the Eastern Front. The Soviet Union, though bloodied, rose. Kursk marked a turning point. The Germans had lost maneuver dominance. The Soviets would now push westward, inexorably. Some historians place Kursk above even Stalingrad as the decisive turning point, because here the Germans' armored spearhead was broken for good. Legacy, myths, and debates. Yet Kursk is not free of controversy. Soviet wartime propaganda may have inflated German tank losses and underplayed Soviet casualties. Scholars debate the precise scale of the clash at Prokhorovka, whether it was truly a massive armored melee or more limited in scope. There is also debate on whether the Soviets would have prevailed even without Hitler's meddling and the delays in Citadel-ES launch. Some argue those delays cost Germany the advantage. But regardless of nuance and numbers, Kursk looms large in the memory of history, as the steel hammer that shattered German dreams in the East. Lessons for modern warfare. Kursk teaches the value of depth in defense, of intelligence and deception, of well-timed counterattacks and the limits of technological superiority without logistical resilience. Modern militaries still study Kursk's defensive belts, the art of masking reserves, and how to prepare a battlefield months in advance. It also reminds us of war's terrors, how millions of lives, machinery, and landscapes are reshaped in weeks of metallic thunder. The morning of July 12, 1943, would become etched in history as the bloodiest day of armored warfare ever recorded. The fields near Prokhorovka, a quiet rural village before the war, were now the center of a steel hurricane. From the west, over 300 Soviet T-34 tanks advanced across open ground, kicking up dust that turned the rising sun into a red haze. From the opposite ridge, SS General Paul Hausser's 2 SS Panzer Corps rolled forward. Elite German formations including Leibstandarte, Das Reich, and Totenkopf. The German Tigers, though fewer in number, held a terrifying advantage. Thicker armor and longer guns. Each 80mm shell they fired could destroy a T-34 at nearly 2 kilometers. But the Soviets had learned from bitter experience. They didn't wait. They charged. The T-34s closed the distance as fast as possible, swarming the German positions, forcing the battle into close quarters where the Tigers' long-range guns lost their edge. The air filled with smoke, dust, and fire. The deafening roar of hundreds of engines and cannon fire merging into a single apocalyptic sound. Soviet crews often fired on the move, relying on speed and numbers rather than accuracy. German commanders described the sight as a red tidal wave of tanks. Even so, the disciplined German gunners exacted a terrible price. The fields became littered with burning wrecks, metal carcasses still glowing as ammunition cooked off inside. By noon, both sides had taken devastating losses. At one point, Soviet Commander Rotmistrov reportedly radioed to his superiors, "The battlefield is burning. We cannot count our dead." But Kursk was more than just a battle of tanks. It was a battle of strategy, intelligence, and endurance. The Soviets had prepared for months, mining the fields, digging thousands of trenches, and positioning artillery in layers. They even built mock command posts to mislead German reconnaissance. Behind the front, NKVD units monitored morale, ensuring no one retreated without orders. Stalin himself demanded victory, and Zhukov promised to deliver it. Meanwhile, the Germans were under pressure from the highest command. Hitler-ES Operation Citadel, the plan to cut off the Kursk salient, was already delayed by months. And now, as the Red Army counterattacked from both the north and south, the window for success was closing rapidly. Then came the final blow, news that would seal the fate of the battle. On July 10th, just 2 days before Prokhorovka, Allied forces had landed in Sicily. Hitler panicked. Facing the possibility of losing Italy, he began withdrawing divisions from the Eastern Front to defend the Mediterranean. The Wehrmacht's greatest offensive of 1943 was collapsing under its own weight, crushed by Soviet resistance and by global pressure. By late July, the Germans called off Citadel. Their spearheads had penetrated only a few dozen kilometers into the Soviet defenses, nowhere near the encirclement they envisioned. But the cost was staggering. Both sides lost thousands of tanks and tens of thousands of men. Exact numbers vary depending on the source. Some estimates suggest the Soviets lost over 6,000 tanks and 250,000 men, while the Germans lost around 1,500 tanks and 50,000 troops, numbers unthinkable by Western standards. Yet it was not merely a tactical struggle, it was a turning point in the entire war. After Kursk, the Wehrmacht would never again launch a large-scale offensive on the Eastern Front. The strategic initiative had passed permanently to the Red Army. From that moment on, it would be the Soviets who advanced, all the way to Berlin. Music swells, montage tone. And for the men who fought there, Kursk remained more than a battle. It was a furnace that tested every limit of human endurance. Tank crews fought in machines that could become ovens within seconds. Some burned alive. Others bailed out under fire, only to be cut down by machine guns. There were no front lines anymore, only chaos, smoke, and survival. German soldiers spoke of the hell of Kursk, while Soviet veterans remembered it as the moment the tide turned. The day they proved that the Red Army could not only withstand but break the might of the Nazi war machine. Today, the fields around Kursk are quiet once more. Grain grows over the craters. Villages rebuilt from ashes now stand where thousands once died. But beneath that soil lie the remains of a generation. Young men from both sides, caught in a storm greater than themselves. The Battle of Kursk was not just a victory of one army over another. It was a victory of endurance, of sacrifice, of sheer willpower against one of history's most formidable war machines. And it marked the moment when the balance of power shifted, when the Red Star began its unstoppable march westward. In the words of one survivor, Kursk was where death itself lost count. In the end, every great battle is remembered by its numbers, divisions, tanks, casualties. But what truly defines Kursk are the faces, the voices of those who were there, the men who lived, and the countless who didn't. Among the survivors was Lieutenant Dmitry Gusev, commander of a T-34 in the 5th Guards Tank Army. In a letter he wrote just days after the battle, he described what it felt like to drive into the inferno of Prokhorovka. When the order came, we didn't cheer. We just started the engines. The ground shook from hundreds of tanks moving as one. The sky was black with smoke. We could not hear our own guns, only the scream of metal and the cries on the radio, half lost in static. I remember seeing my gunner's face in the flash of an explosion, just once and never again. His words, preserved in the archives of the Soviet Defense Ministry, reveal not triumph, but trauma. On the other side, SS Unterscharführer Karl-Heinz Rühle, a Tiger tank driver from the Leibstandarte division, recalled something eerily similar in his post-war memoirs. At Prokhorovka, we were surrounded by smoke. We could see nothing. I turned the turret and suddenly a T-34 appeared out of the haze, 50 meters away. It rammed us. We fired at the same moment. Both tanks went up in flames. I was thrown clear, my uniform burning. I thought, this is what the end of the world must look like. These are not the words of men fighting for ideology. They are the words of men trapped inside history's machinery, powerless to stop it. For the Soviet soldiers, the fields of Kursk were both victory and graveyard. Tens of thousands were buried where they fell, marked only by wooden crosses that time soon erased. For many German families, their sons simply disappeared into the east, names listed as missing in action, never to be found. The battlefield itself became sacred ground. In later years, Soviet villagers ploughing their fields would still find bones, helmets, and the rusted hulls of tanks, silent reminders of the storm that once consumed their land. But beyond the smoke and the destruction, Kursk revealed something deeper about the war, and about humanity itself. It showed how courage and fear can live side by side. How men who had nothing left still found reasons to fight, for comrades, for survival, for the faintest hope that one day it would end. One Soviet tanker, interviewed decades later, was asked if he hated the Germans. He paused for a long time before answering, "No, I don't hate them. We were all young, we were all afraid, the war made beasts of us. But we were still men." That simple statement captures what thousands of pages of history books cannot: the unbearable humanity hidden beneath the steel and strategy of Kursk. After the battle, both armies withdrew to count their dead. The Red Army, battered but unbroken, began pushing west. Within a year it would cross into Poland, within 2 it would reach Berlin. The German dream of victory in the east died on the fields of Kursk, and with it the illusion of Nazi invincibility. But victory came at a cost so immense that even Stalin himself hesitated to celebrate it publicly. When he received the first reports from the front, his response was short: "We have won, but the motherland has paid dearly." Now, more than 80 years later, the land has healed. Children play where tanks once burned. The grass hides the scars, but the earth remembers. Every summer, veterans, historians, and families gather near Prokhorovka to honor the fallen. Among them, a small memorial stands with a simple inscription carved in stone. They fought not for glory, but so that others might live. And perhaps that is the truest legacy of Kursk. Not the clash of empires, not the tactics or machines, but the reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, courage and sacrifice still shine through the smoke. The guns have fallen silent. The fires of Kursk, once visible from miles away, have burned out. But the echoes of that colossal clash would resonate through the rest of the Second World War, and far beyond it. The Battle of Kursk was more than a single engagement. It was the turning point, the moment when the initiative in the East shifted forever from the Wehrmacht to the Red Army. From this point on, Germany would never again launch a major offensive on the Eastern Front. In Berlin, the mood was grim. Reports from the front described catastrophic losses, more than 200,000 German casualties, hundreds of tanks destroyed, and divisions reduced to shadows of their former strength. For the first time, even Hitler's inner circle began to doubt the dream of victory. On July 13, 1943, as Soviet counterattacks intensified, Hitler summoned his generals to his headquarters in East Prussia. Operation Citadel, the grand offensive meant to restore German dominance, was over. He cancelled it personally, his voice trembling with rage and disbelief. "We will never again be able to launch an attack of such scale," he muttered, according to General Heinz Guderian's memoirs. "The blow at Kursk has broken our back." Guderian, the architect of Blitzkrieg, later reflected that Kursk was the final proof that Germany's offensive power was exhausted. "We had gambled everything," he wrote, "and lost." In Moscow, however, the atmosphere was electric. Stalin, who had waited cautiously for confirmation, declared victory on July 23rd. His message to the Soviet people was simple: the enemy has been defeated not only by courage, but by the power of our industry, our science, and our will. Indeed, Kursk was not just a battlefield triumph. It was a triumph of logistics, of intelligence, and of industrial might. Soviet factories, relocated deep beyond the Ural Mountains, had achieved what seemed impossible. Every week, hundreds of new T-34 tanks rolled out, replacing losses almost as fast as they occurred. German commanders, meanwhile, struggled to replace even a fraction of their destroyed Tigers and Panthers. While German industry still relied on precision craftsmanship, slow, detailed, and resource-heavy, Soviet production had become a machine of its own, fueled by sheer quantity and determination. Kursk was the first major battle where that industrial balance tipped decisively in favor of the USSR. By August 1943, Soviet counteroffensives pushed westward. Belgorod fell on August 5th, Orel on August 6th, and then came Kharkov, the city that had changed hands 4 times in 2 years. This time it would never return to German control. From Kursk to the Dnieper, from Dnieper to Kiev, the red tide began to roll back the invader. The myth of Nazi invincibility, the same myth born in the blitzkriegs of 1939 and 1940, died among the burning wrecks on the Kursk salient. But victory came with a haunting cost. Soviet casualties were staggering, nearly 900,000 dead, wounded or missing. Entire tank crews vanished without a trace. One Soviet officer later said, "We won the battle, but at Kursk, I lost all my friends." For many veterans, the word victory would always carry the taste of ashes. Today, visitors to the Kursk region can still see the scars. Farmers occasionally uncover rusted shells, tracks and fragments of armor buried beneath the soil. The small town of Prokhorovka, once an inferno of steel, is now home to a serene memorial complex, a towering bell that tolls each year on July 12th, the anniversary of the greatest tank clash in history. When the bell rings, its echo rolls across the fields, a sound both mournful and proud, as if the land itself remembers. In the years after the war, the Battle of Kursk became legend. In the Soviet Union, it was celebrated as proof of the Red Army's heroism and the genius of its commanders. In the West, it was studied as a symbol of industrial warfare, the moment when tanks, not men, decided the fate of nations. But behind every statistic lies a truth deeper than any propaganda. Kursk was not just the story of victory and defeat, it was the story of endurance, of how ordinary soldiers, thrown into unimaginable chaos, refused to surrender to despair. Fade to black and white photos of soldiers smiling, letters home, families waiting. They fought, not for glory or empire, but for survival. And in doing so, they changed the course of the world. When Berlin finally fell in May 1945, many veterans of Kursk were there, weary, scarred, and silent. For them, the road to victory had begun in those endless fields of fire. The inscription reads, "Here, in the summer of 1943, steel met steel, and the fate of the world was decided." The Battle of Kursk was not just the deadliest tank clash in history. It was the day when the tide of war began to turn, and when courage, sacrifice, and the will to endure proved stronger than the engines of war. Time has softened the scars of Kursk, but beneath the soil, beneath every blade of grass, the ghosts remain. The Battle of Kursk was not only the turning point of World War II on the Eastern Front. It was a battle that defined the modern age of warfare, the birth of industrial mechanical combat on a scale the world had never seen before. And even decades later, historians continue to argue over a haunting question: could the outcome have been different? Some German officers, like General Erich von Manstein, believed that if Hitler had allowed him to launch the attack earlier, in May instead of July, the Wehrmacht might have broken through before the Soviets finished fortifying the salient. He wrote bitterly in his memoirs, "Every day of delay gave the enemy time to grow stronger. Kursk was lost before the first tank moved." Yet others, including Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov, argued the opposite. Zhukov insisted that delay had been Germany's doom. "They gave us time," he later said, "and with time we built our wall of fire." Indeed, Soviet engineers had turned the Kursk region into an iron labyrinth. Over 3,000 miles of trenches, 500,000 mines, and thousands of camouflaged gun emplacements. It was not just a battlefield, it was a fortress. But the true secret of Kursk's outcome lies deeper than tactics or timing. It lies in the shift of momentum, in the slow but unstoppable tide of Soviet resurgence. By mid-1943, the Soviet Union was no longer the desperate nation of 1941. Its armies were larger, its generals battle-hardened, and its people, hardened by unthinkable loss, were willing to endure anything to drive the invader out. Entire families worked day and night in the factories. Teenagers and women replaced men at the front lines of production. One worker in a Ural tank plant famously carved into the side of a T-34, "For my brothers who fell near Moscow, Let this tank avenge them. That inscription, historians say, was found by a German soldier months later and recorded in his diary. For Germany, Kursk was the breaking point. For the Soviet Union, it was the rebirth of hope. After Kursk, Stalin's armies began a relentless advance westward, through Ukraine, Poland, and into the heart of Europe. The Red Army would eventually reach Berlin less than 2 years later. Every step of that journey, every bridge crossed, every village retaken, carried the echoes of the tanks that clashed on the Kursk salient. For the men who fought there, the memories never faded. In post-war interviews, veterans spoke not of victory but of survival. One Soviet tanker, his face lined with age, recalled, "When the battle ended, the silence was worse than the noise. We looked around and realized there was nothing left alive." A German veteran, interviewed in 1965, said almost the same words. "The smell of burned oil and flesh stayed with me for years. I still dream of the black smoke." These testimonies reveal what military history often hides, that behind every strategy map and victory parade, there are human beings who carried the unbearable weight of it all. In 1949, Soviet engineers began collecting the remains of tanks destroyed at Kursk. More than 100 were recovered, Tigers, Panthers, and T-34s, and melted down to build the foundations of new machinery, trains, and even memorials. Steel that once brought death was reshaped into instruments of life. In that transformation lies a powerful symbol, that even from destruction, renewal can emerge. Every summer, on the anniversary of the battle, survivors' families and descendants gather at Prokhorovka Field. The great memorial bell rings 12 times, once for each division that perished. The sound rolls across the countryside, carried by the wind. Children hold flowers. Old veterans stand in silence, eyes closed, remembering the friends who never came home. And when the bell falls silent, there is peace. A peace bought with the courage of men who faced the impossible. The Battle of Kursk remains the largest tank battle in human history. More than 6,000 armored vehicles, 2 million soldiers, and thousands of aircraft clashed across the steppes of Russia. It was the battle where steel met will, where technology met endurance, and where the fate of the Second World War was decided not by who struck first, but by who refused to fall. History remembers Kursk as a victory, but for those who were there, it was something greater. A testament to human endurance and a warning about the terrible price of power. They fought not for glory but for survival. May their memory never fade.